Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. Would ask everyone here in-house to make that courtesy check your cell phones have been turned off. That is always appreciated. And, of course, our internet viewers are welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And of course, we will post the program following today's presentation on the Heritage homepage for your future reference. Hosting our guest today is Stephen Bucci. Dr. Bucci is director of our Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy. He served for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and a top Pentagon official. He specializes in operations and cybersecurity as well as defense support to civilian authorities. He served as military assistant to former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld for 5.5 years, and after retiring from the Army, he continued at the Pentagon as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Homeland Defense, and America's Security Affairs. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Steve Bucci. Steve?
All right, well, let me add my welcome to John's, and we're glad you're here, and the folks that are piping in over the internet. Look, a lot of people do events about terrorism. I mean, it happens constantly here in Washington and all the way across the country with good reason. While some people here in town have said the war on terror is over, ISIS kind of put lie to that, and I think we all finally woke up and said, whoa, this thing is still going on. We'd love it to be over. Americans like to fight wars, get them done, and move out, go on to the next issue. Unfortunately, this one's not going away yet. So we have to look at how we're doing it. Are we doing it correctly? Are we doing it incorrectly? Lots of people have opinions, and you're going to hear one man's opinion on that today. Our guest has written a very fine book. It's called The New Terrorism, How to Fight It and How to Defeat It, and it's available outside. It has a lot of information, background information on some of these issues, and then has some really interesting ideas on what we can do to maybe do this a little better. We've got to find a way to do it better because we're still living under that cloud. And I'm enough of an American, I'd like to get it done too. But I'm not sure if that's doable, but we'll go forward here in a second. Our guest, Van Hipp, is the chairman of America Defense International. He got into the defense and security business back in 1990 when he became the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Reserve Forces and Mobilization. That's a critical job on the Secretary of the Army staff, dealing with all of our reserve component folks, which play such an important role and have played such an important role thus far in the war on terror. He also then became the Principal Deputy General Counsel for the Navy. I'll forgive him for that brief sojourn with those other guys. But he is also, this is why I forgive him, he's also an Army veteran of both Operation Desert Storm and Operation Restore Democracy. He has really put a lot of great effort into this book, and I think it's worthwhile. I recommend it. And now we get to hear a little bit from the author. So, Van, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dr. Bucci, and I want to thank you and others here at the Heritage Foundation for having me here today. I had always wanted to write a book, and historically I had looked a lot at the threat between North Korea and Iran, and looked at that and was talking to a friend of mine who had actually worked for President Reagan. He said, Van, a lot of books about Iran and North Korea and so forth, but what we really need is a book that looks at the totality of the threats to America and what we need to do to keep America safe, and then to look at it from a perspective, how do we do it without going broke? And that's why my last chapter is called Victory Without Bankruptcy. And I do believe that the fight against radical Islam is the challenge of our time. And so one of the things that I do in the book right at the outset is to look at it from a historical perspective, because I think it's important that we understand why they're doing what they're doing. So we go back and look at the time of Muhammad and the first 4 caliphs, and look at some of the Islamic writings from even the 1500s, so that we understand that it's all about these different groups in the new terrorism, I kind of define it as dispersion, because it has dispersed and it's gotten worse. You know, I want to say back in 2010, we had about 90% of ISIS's predecessors' capability wiped out. General Lloyd Austin urged, who was the ground commander at the time, urged the president to leave a small residual force so it would not reconstitute itself. The president didn't listen to his ground commander. Now we have a much bigger problem on our hands. But the goal of the Islamists is to restore the caliphate, and that non-believers would convert and live as second-class citizens, something called dimitude, and those who don't would be killed. And one of the things I've noticed recently, I've said this: we can defeat radical Islam militarily, but we've got to make sure we've got the right systems in place so that it does not reconstitute itself. I personally am a big fan of King Abdullah. I knew him about 20 years ago when he commanded their special forces. He is the real deal, and I believe his father, the late King Hussein, knew what he was doing when he named him the crown prince right before he died, because he had commanded the special forces. His wife was Palestinian, and 70%, by the way, the population of Jordan is not Hashemites. They're Palestinians. It was one guy who could hold it together. Very interesting that he came to D.C. a few weeks ago and basically told our Congress, I want to take the fight to them, but I've got roadblocks by your State Department. I need your help to get me the things that I need. And recently I heard him on TV saying this is opportunity for Muslims, Christians, and Jews to come together to go after ISIS and go after the radical Islamists. And I see that as an opportunity for us. But what I want to do is we talk about the history of radical Islam, because I think it's important to understand that perspective, but then look at the different threats to the country. And what I like to do is kind of go through some of those specific threats, some of the countermeasures or recommendations that we've come up with by over the years. It took me a few years to do this, I got to tell you. And we did the kickoff of the book tour at the Nixon Library. And people ask, why did you do it there? I remember seeing after 9/11, they replayed one of President Nixon's last interviews he gave on Larry King before he died. And they asked him the question, Mr. President, as we approach the 21st century, what should we as Americans be most concerned with? Nixon didn't bat an eye. He said the rise of Islamic fanaticism. I got a chill up my spine. That was back in early 1994. So that's why we did it there. My 27-year-old son told me the day that my 15-year-old son told him as I was about to speak, he said, I didn't think he was ever going to finish the thing, but we did. And I do want to also thank, before I get into some of these threats very quickly, the National Guard Education Foundation. 100% of all the proceeds of the book are going for scholarships for the children of fallen guardsmen. And the National Guard Education Foundation has agreed to administer all scholarships without taking one dime of administrative fees or costs. I want to thank them in particular. Missile defense is so important to this country. And I know that's something that the Heritage Foundation has done a lot of work on over the years. I want to briefly hit on it because there's some things in our chapter on missile defense you won't see in any other book, never been in print before. And missile defense is important for a variety of threats, not just our traditional ICBMs and things like that, nuclear threat, electromagnetic pulse threat, you name it. But I also tell the story of a man I call the unsung hero of missile defense, the late Dr. Jim Edwards, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Energy. We tell the story in the book. Dr. Edward Teller was the man who sold Ronald Reagan on the idea of a missile defense shield for this country. When he was the head of the Lawrence Livermore National Lab and Reagan was governor of California. Reagan went out there and said, I want you to show me some of the neat things that you're doing. He did. Well, long story short, Reagan becomes president, and the budget director at the time is blocking Teller from getting in to see Reagan. He said, that thing costs too much money, we can't afford it, and basically puts out an edict, keep Dr. Teller away from President Reagan. Well, Dr. Jim Edwards, who was then Reagan's Secretary of Energy, got to know Teller. Teller complained to him. We tell the story of how Edwards got the original letter that Albert Einstein wrote to Roosevelt proposing the Manhattan Project. Took that, got Dr. Teller to write a letter to Reagan proposing a strategic defense initiative for America. Put the two together, and together they went around the budget director, went to the president. The rest is history. We tell the story in the book. But on the east coast of the United States, there is no land-based missile defense capability. We need a land-based missile defense capability on the east coast of the United States. And in the interim, we have a few gap filler solutions. We talk about Aegis being equipped to deal with the intercontinental ballistic missile threat, as well as JLENS, which is a 400-mile radar capability that could talk to interceptors. Again, give us a near-term missile defense capability, because right now we have a missing missile defense really on the east coast of the United States. We talk about cybersecurity a lot in the book. I call cybersecurity and cyber warfare the threat that America is the most unprepared for. Those too big to fail banks back in 2008 have only gotten bigger. It's almost like death by 1,000 hacks, if you will. And I call not for preemptive war, but for preventive war. You know, if they say for preemptive war, we can do preemption when you reach something where you say that there's no moment for deliberation. In cyber warfare, when there's no moment for deliberation, it's over with. They've already hacked into your system. They've already taken you down. And I distinguish between two basic types of attacks. What the Chinese are doing, which is more about espionage and trying to steal our intellectual property, and they're operating through proxies, versus what the Islamists and like the Iranians are doing. And for them, it's not about espionage, it's about sabotage. They're trying to take down our systems. So we look at those and we come up with different countermeasures for each. We've been able to trace 90% of the Chinese hacks to two groups, one in Beijing, one in Shanghai. The Elderwood group, another one called Comment Crew. The Chinese say they have nothing to do with them. And with this very strong indications, they're a quasi part of the Chinese military. So I tell the Chinese, look, if you've got nothing to do with them, we're going to take you at your word. Please join with the United States and let's together declare them as cyber terrorist organizations. One of the things we need in this country, we need true cyber experts, real cyber experts to counter the worst threats. James Gosler was one of our top cybersecurity experts at the CIA and the National Security Agency. He says that we need between 20 and 30,000 of the very best cybersecurity experts to counter these the very worst of these attacks. Guess how many we have? Only about 1,000. We need a major recruitment campaign. In fact, I call for the establishment of national security scholarships for our colleges and universities for the very best and brightest cybersecurity, data security, computer science majors. We need a massive recruitment effort there. A couple other things I talk about in the book. I want to briefly hit some of the highlights here. Open source intelligence is something I think that is untapped to a large degree. The Aspen Brown Commission and others say that we get 90% of our intelligence from open source. But oftentimes, we don't pay enough attention to it and don't use it. I'll give you an example. When you do a Google search, Google only gives you the most popular searches. It doesn't give you everything that's out there. So what I did back in 2012, I went to a university that had like 1,000 search engines, 1,000 processors, and we started doing public searches in other languages. Guess what we found? It had never been reported into the United States until I went on Bill Hemmer with Fox News that the Iranians were on the ground in North Korea, helping them with their missile test, and that's in the book. Helping them with their missile test back in 2012, and we also found that in Farsi. It was in an Iranian newspaper. They were talking about it, bragging about it, had pictures. Did another search in Japanese and found where the Japanese Kyoto News Agency had said the same thing, validating what was in the Iranian newspapers. Open source, I think the former Defense Intelligence Agency director said it best. We need fewer James Bonds and more Sherlock Holmes. We need to get that intelligence that's staring us in the face. And as there's more and more data, it's tougher and tougher to do. How do you get to it? That's why data analytics is so important. The 9/11 Commission said that 9/11 was a failure of imagination. We always keep responding to that last attack, that last threat. We've got to think outside the box so that we can prevent the next one. And for example, one of the things I talk about in the book, the country of Niger. the country, look at the uranium reserves that are there in Niger. What's uranium used for? To make nuclear weapons. I call for working with the French because they got their independence, the French in 1960, to get those uranium reserves out of there. Well, guess what's happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks? Boko Haram has begun border attacks on the country of Niger. We have to think outside the box and get ahead of this. One of the things I talk about in there, and I think it's important, when you talk about the soft target scenario, it's so tough to defend against. We saw the recent threat by Al-Shabaab on the Mall of America. How do you deal with that? One of the things I call for is a true situational awareness hotline for America, completely separate from 911. We don't want to fool with that and interfere with that, but a true situational awareness hotline. People say, well, ask what can I do, and the government says, well, we can be vigilant. If we have a true situational awareness hotline and you see suspicious activity, you could in real time text a photo of that to a centralized database that would have all the analytical tools to analyze and respond quick enough. I think and I'll tell you, if you talk to the emergency management directors at the state level, they want something like this. They understand the need for something like this. And I think that would go a long ways to helping with that specific threat. And that's really, I would say, the theme of the book too, and this is important. Technology is changing so quickly. A lot of it's good. But let me tell you, our government, as the folks here at the Heritage Foundation know, unfortunately, all too well, our government is so stovepiped and lacks that ability to analyze and adapt and respond quick enough. So it's almost as if as the technologies increase so rapidly, the threats are increasing exponentially. Border security, we have a lot of recommendations on border security. Let me just say this. We've seen what's happened in France recently. We've seen what's happened in Denmark. Remember a few years ago when the Danish cartoonist Kurt Westergaard did a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad? There was an imam, Saeed Jaziri, who, by the way, was banned from entry into France, banned from entry into Canada, put out a fatwa call for his assassination. We caught that guy a couple of years ago. You know where we caught him? In the trunk of a BMW trying to come across our Mexican border. It's very real. They know how to get to this country. They're here. Our current FBI director says that he has open files in all 50 states of America, all 50 states, with people with potential connections to ISIS. His predecessor, Robert Mueller, testified a couple of years ago that in 2010, they captured 59,000 people from countries other than Mexico were apprehended illegally trying to come to America. And these included people from Somalia, Iran, Yemen, Syria, you name it. So border security, so important. And there are a lot of things that we can do that we're not doing. Securing our skies. One of the biggest concerns I have are with those man-portable air defense systems. We still have 300 to 600 Stingers that are unaccounted for from back in the Afghan wars. But more importantly, our own State Department says that since 1967, there were over 1 million man-pads manufactured. Most of those are in the hands of governments, but unfortunately there are several thousand that are not. So if they're not in the hands of governments, who are they in the hands of? I think you know. And that's why I believe we need laser jammers on our civilian aircraft. A couple other key points. Biodefense, we go into a lot of detail here on biodefense, things that can be done. They're not being done. Our military has some great biodefense countermeasures and capabilities. There's a civilian organization called BARDA. They've got some great stuff. Problem is they need to do a better job working and talking to each other. What good is it if we've got all these great vaccines and therapeutics for biological pathogens, radiological incidents, things like that, if they're in a warehouse, but we lack the logistical capability and the training to deploy it in a timely manner to save the lives of the American people. And we go into detail there, how they can do a better job of working together. We also talk about how red tape, the bureaucracy, the regulations really imperil our national security and homeland security. And we show the growth of that, and really I really call for something like a BRAC commission, if you will, for all the bureaucratic regulations that would operate like that to get rid of a lot of these things and do it in such a way, if you did it like BRAC, you would depoliticize the process. And we go into a lot of detail on that. And then, how do you pay for all this stuff? And that's the chapter where we call it Victory Without Bankruptcy. We look at how we can change contracting at the Pentagon to go from a cost-plus system and contracts to a prospective payment system where people are encouraged to not only finish on time but come in under budget and things like that, save money. We also take a look at something I'm a big fan of. It's now called the Rapid Fielding Directorate. It used to be called the Advanced Concepts Technology Demonstration Program. It's the program where the unmanned aerial system was really born. And what I like about them is from a research standpoint, they work with the end customer at the outset to get buy-in. What that means is the research dollars of the American taxpayer are spent more efficiently, and the taxpayers get more bang for the buck. I believe that model should be replicated throughout all services and also over to the Department of Homeland Security as well. And but those are just some of the highlights. And one of the things that we don't have today that we had after 9/11, the country came together. America came together, and we resolved that we would do whatever it took to keep America safe. Edward Gibbons wrote in his epitaph on ancient Athens, he said, in the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all. Security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally determined not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free. We need to come together again just like we did after 9/11 and have that same kind of resolve to do whatever it takes to keep America safe. Thank you very much, and be happy to get into some questions.
Okay. First, I have to read the ground rules. All right. For those of you who've been here before, I have a standard speech when I do this. I will raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you, and then you tell us who you are, what your question is. I'll give you about 2 sentences. If I don't hear a question mark, then I'll ask you to stop. We've got a good 30 minutes here. We got time to do it, and may get some come in over the internet. But who has the first question? Yes, sir. And then we'll get you next.
Ken Meyercord, World Docs. Terrorism is one of those words like racism or genocide that often gets abused. And I don't have a good feeling for what you mean by terrorism, much less the new terrorism. Missile defense doesn't seem to relate to guys in sneakers at keffiyehs planting IEDs in Iraq, for instance.
I said earlier, when I say the new terrorism, I'm talking about radical Islam, but I'm talking about dispersion, how it has dispersed from Al-Qaeda and the ISIS, Boko Haram, you name it, the dispersion of it, and it is a growing cancer. The reason I mentioned missile defense in it, missile defense is something that we need to deal with specific threats. Threats, for example, from Iran. Iran is a terrorist regime as far as I'm concerned. If you look at their missile technology, the Shahab missile, compare it to the Typhoon missile out of North Korea, surprise, surprise, it's the same missile technology. They've been working on it for years. So when I look at, for example, a ship-based attack on this country or a submarine attack or any kind of an attack to the country involving a missile, and bad guys have got missiles and terrorists can get missiles, I look at I believe missile defense is one vital component to keeping America safe. So I look at the totality of this. And there's no one magic answer, no one magic bullet. It's a combination of things that we have to do. Missile defense is a part of that, and I am concerned about the missing missile defense on our East Coast.
Okay. This young lady right here.
My name is Bailey, and I'm currently working at the Heritage Foundation. I had a question, and I was hoping you could elaborate on your solutions to enhance our cybersecurity in this country, given that so many of the current experts in this field are not necessarily motivated to protect our national security. I know you mentioned universities, but is there a solution we can take right now?
Yeah, I think, for example, right now we need a recruitment campaign because, quite frankly, we don't have the expertise, enough true cyber experts to thwart the worst attacks. I call for like I said, a preventive war as opposed to a preemptive war, and by that I mean going on the attack. I'm glad we're finally getting these 27 cyber teams up and running. I think we should do more like what the country of Georgia did. I don't know if you followed that. When some of Putin's thugs tried to hack into them recently, they had set a booby trap. So they were actually able to take control of the on the other end and actually get a picture of the people doing it. Those are the things what I mean by doing a true preventive war. I do think as far as the Iranians are concerned, so many of the attacks from the financial institutions are coming from the Iranians. The internet to them is so important. I think we need to let them know that if we need to, we will interfere with the satellite transponders, and we're prepared to take down their internet coverage. And like I said, for the Chinese, I think we need to. We have traced 90% of those of all cyber attacks back to two main groups, and I think I think we need to be more aggressive on that. There are some advancements also, I think, in quantum computing we're seeing now, and if that works, that would be a game changer, and it'd be very, very tough to hack.
Right here. Hi, my name is Nate Mortensen. I'm also an intern here at the Heritage Foundation. I have a follow-up question about the number required of these counter cyber terrorism experts. You called for 30,000, 20 to 30,000. If we only have 1,000 now, how do you propose we swell those ranks to that required number in time to defend us against a real threat now?
Yeah, 20 to 30,000 is what James Gosler said, and I agree with him. And he's worked at both the CIA and the NSA. Also in the book, before I call for the establishment of these national security scholarships, I call for a massive recruitment campaign right now to go wherever we need to get the best data security experts. That means going outside the United States wherever we need to get them, because we have a tremendous shortage right now in the United States.
Yep. Over there? Yeah.
Maya, a former Heritage intern. With all the security breaks that have occurred, like in airports and such, over the past couple of years, do you think it will take another September 11th to actually generate the political will to actually make some of these changes happen?
Unfortunately, you're probably right. One of the things I do think, though, and I talk about it in the book, is it's important for conservatives to come together with what I call the old Scoop Jackson Democrats to go after, and I'm dating myself when I talk about Scoop Jackson Democrats. My kids don't know what that is, but Scoop Jackson Democrat is someone I may disagree with on economic policy and so forth, but when it comes to national security issues, they get it. There was a phrase coined after 9/11 called the 9/11 liberals, which I would say are the modern-day Scoop Jackson Democrats. I may disagree with them on a number of political issues, but when it comes to national security, there's a lot of common ground with traditional conservatives. I think we need to work with them to get through some of the things that we need. Yes, sir.
Ken Meyercourt again. Speaking of this question of cyber security experts, we have an awful lot of students from China studying computer science in this country these days. Do you see any problem with recruiting them?
Well, it depends on how they came and what they're working on. But I mean, those are the kinds of, that we need to have all the kinds of security safeguards in place to do that.
To be honest with you, most of them have already been recruited, but not by us.
Yeah.
Well, that's the reality.
Yeah, that is. One of the things we talk about, speaking of the Chinese, is pretty interesting. How do we avert a coming arms race with the Chinese? One of the things I do think that is in our favor long term, demographically speaking, And if we think we have a demographic problem, and by that I mean there's a population ages and more of a strain on the financial systems, the health systems of the country and all. You know, I tell people, and this is in the book, oh man, we're spending so much on defense, the national security is killing us. In 1960, of the federal budget, of all federal spending, national security spending was over like 52% of all federal spending in 1960. In 2010, it was down to 20%. We're seeing those entitlement programs are really what's killing us from an economic standpoint. But if you think we have a problem, if you look at China, back in the mid-1970s, the average Chinese woman gave birth to like 5.8 kids. And then they went into that one child per family rule. So today it's down to 1.8 per family, which is less than the 2.1 you need to sustain a population. The reason I say that, they've got a coming problem demographically much, much worse than the United States. So I think there's going to be an opportunity they have many internal problems they're going to have to deal with. I think that's an opportunity for us.
Thank you. I'm coming from the Middle East. I'm from Oman. And I want to, if you could elaborate about the terminology of radical Islam. Because it hurt me when I heard that the Islam is radical. Those people who are actually involved in such things, they are misinterpreting Islam. So it's nothing to say about Islam itself, but about the misinterpretation of people who are doing such things. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things I call for, and it's sort of a reward program, if you will. We need to reward what I call the moderate and reform Muslims in this country who come forward with actionable intelligence. Give you a case in point. Think about that mosque in Fairfax, Virginia, where the imam was Anwar al-Awlaki, who went on to head al-Qaeda in Yemen. 3 of the 9/11 hijackers went there. Let's see who else went there. Nader Malik Hassan, the Fort Hood terrorist and murderer, he went there. Others one who had called for the assassination of the late king of Saudi Arabia. Another one who went on to head up the Boston Islamic Society, where the Boston bombers went. What if just one person from that mosque had come forward? Think about the lives that could have potentially been saved. So I'm with you. So I call for almost like a rewards program for moderate and reform Muslims who do come forward. One of the things, too, I will say along those lines, that is that political correctness is killing us. Mentioned Nader Malik Hassan. The FBI had 18 emails that they had in their possession between him and Anwar al-Awlaki, the head of al-Qaeda in Yemen, did nothing because they wanted to be politically correct. And then also he had his co-workers coming forward as well. Political correctness is killing us.
You have another question?
A follow-up question on the Middle East. I'm interested in your belief in the power of coalition building to go after ISIS. You mentioned Dr. Abdullah's suggestion, but I've been doing some reading on Qasem Soleimani of Iran, and as the special leader of the Quds Force, he has his own agenda. Do you believe that it's important to work with these kind of partners to confront the threat of ISIS?
I would work with the right kind of partners. I would like King Abdullah. When I see King Abdullah stepping up to the plate, I see that as an opportunity for us. I would work with President Sisi in Egypt, there are about 6 countries there, Arab countries, that have been involved to some degree in the fight of ISIS. I would work with those countries, give them everything that they need.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Mark Fabrizio, intern at Heritage. This is about acquisition. I think you said you recommended moving away from cost-plus contracts, and I just wanted to see, so would you recommend using more fixed-price contracts instead, or is there maybe an alternative type?
Something called a prospective payment system that we go into. Something that actually originally came up during the Reagan administration. So a prospective payment system. Right now, one of the problems with the Costplus, it's almost like I think it was the Department of Defense Inspector General did a study back in like 2001, 2005. There were like 300 billion in cost overruns in some of our biggest systems because people were encouraged to keep adding things. So a prospective payment system would go a long ways to dealing with that.
Do you think that Cost Plus could be used in some instances, or just more of a shift towards?
More of a shift, but again, it's a lot of money that can be saved right there.
Thanks.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to exercise
Yes, sir.
my moderator's thing. I'm going to ask you one more question, and you can use that to do your wrap-up. But I'd like you to compare the U.S. in 2001, pick somewhere in the middle, 2008, 2009, and now. Or is America, what's our level of security or level of insecurity in each of those time hacks? So 2001, someplace in the middle, and then present. And, basically, are we better or worse?
2001, I think we saw that we lacked the ability to connect the dots on terrorist threats. We saw excerpts from the president's daily briefings, even in the 1990s, where you had Al Qaeda basically saying that it had already declared war on the United States, and talk of hijacking planes and things like that. That inability to really connect the dots. I do think by 2008, progress had been made in the ability to connect the dots. We came a long ways. I think in recent times, it's like we've gotten away and we think, well, we've defeated terrorism. And we've seen, unfortunately, today that we haven't. It's a cancer that is growing. I will say this, and so I think that we are, the terrorist threat is greater today, I believe, than it was then. It's grown. There's no question. I think that the rapid increase in technology makes dealing with the terrorism threat much more complex and challenging. Because it's like I said, as the technology increases, it's almost as if the threats increase exponentially. And we need the resolve of the American people. I will say this, I have been lately going on college campuses and universities, and I've got to tell you, I've been pleasantly surprised by our young people, who normally you would think that colleges and universities will not be a bastion of conservatism, particularly when you consider some of the things that they're being taught on today's campuses. But I got to tell you, I think our young people are beginning to get it and they're waking up. And even though if our commander-in-chief won't define the threat as being radical Islam, I think the young people of today are waking up and they get it and they're concerned and they want to know what to do. So we need that resolved, but I am concerned that the threat is more dangerous today than it was in 2001.
All right. Well, I'll add one comment to our friend from Oman. This is, again, my moderator prerogative. I get to kick in info, too. You're right. Anybody who condemns everyone who follows the tenets of Islam is crazy. That's just nutty. Not everyone who's a Muslim is our enemy, because a whole bunch of them are our friends. But there is that very small sliver that are radical Islamists, which is a political term, not a religious one, that are problematic because they take their interpretation of the scriptures that are incorrect in the minds of most Muslims. I'm not an Islamic theology expert, but I have a lot who are say, no, that what they're saying is wrong, but they turn it into action. And those are the people that are our enemies. They're not just our enemies. They are the enemies of our friends in the Middle East, and King Abdullah is a good example. He's a descendant of the Prophet, and if he says these guys are wrong, we need to stop them, maybe we ought to listen. But I have to tell you, this is a very broad definition of terrorism, a very comprehensive look. It's very readable. I recommend it. And please join me in thanking the author for joining us here today. And I thank all of you for being here, and for all those that are online, thank you, and we are adjourned.